Sure. I'm Sarah Snaga. Oh, there we go. We're recording. I'm Sarah Snaga. I am the executive director at CGEM, the NSF Center for Genetically Encoded Materials, which is based in the College of Chemistry.
Okay, so we're going to be talking today about all of the different strategies for why to apply to grad school, and then how to optimize your application, how to prepare yourself, how to approach letters of recommendation, et cetera. Sarah and I are going to be co-facilitating this workshop. We encourage you to use the Q&A and save your questions for the end. We're hoping that we're quite comprehensive, so we're hoping that we get through most of your questions by the time we get to the end. But we will be staying around at the end for Q&A, and I'm happy to stay until you all feel like you have your questions answered. I think my colleague Sarah is as well. And at that point, we will stop the recording so you can feel free to ask questions and not have that recorded, et cetera. So just to give you a little bit of background about each of us, I actually am a Berkeley alum. I came here as a community college transfer, and I got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering and material science. And then I went to the University of Washington and did my PhD in bioengineering. And I've worked in various aspects I worked in health science policy at the NIH and tech also, and then in higher ed. And here at the College of Chemistry, I do participate in grad admissions. I do read grad apps. And I'm part of the committee that reads and evaluates applications and decides who our students who are admitted are going to be, both for chemistry and chemical engineering. So we have a lot of expertise specifically on what we're looking for in the application. So hopefully this is very useful to you.
And I'm Sarah. I come from Michigan. I did my undergrad at Michigan State, where I majored in biochemistry and molecular biology. And just a props to the ag schools, you get your own on-campus dairy store with ice cream from the cows. After 3 years at Michigan State, I went to Yale for my PhD in molecular biophysics and biochemistry, where I was really involved in the department and graduate student life. And then I knew after grad school that I wanted to get away from the day-to-day bench work, but still wanted to be close to science. And so I took a job with Alana Sheparts, who was then at Yale, in publishing and also in administering this big CGEM collaborative grant. And I want to note that I did some undergraduate research as well at the University of Michigan in between my undergraduate years.
Okay. So this is a little bit of the agenda we're going to go through. So for those of you who are juniors and not quite sure if grad school is for you, we're going to go a little bit into why graduate school. This is something that I wish I would have considered when I was an undergrad. I tried a corporate internship, didn't love it, and just automatically decided, I came back and I was like, I don't know if I want to go into corporate America. And one of my program directors suggested graduate school, and I was like, sure, that sounds good. And I just kind of like haphazardly made the decision to go to graduate school. Not that I regret it, but I think that I wish I would have put a little bit more thought into which type of graduate school, which avenue, what type of research I wanted to pursue, et cetera. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to go into the application process. We're going to touch on where you should apply, how to spread a wide net that is not just focused on rankings of institutions, but really aligns your values and priorities and research interests with the right departments for you. We're going to go into preparing your application, what to do, how to optimize your application, how to optimize your letters of recommendation. Then we're going to talk about funding opportunities, because of course, I think in a few weeks, for those of you who are seniors, the NSF GRFP is due. And if you can, there are other funding opportunities, but if you can get a fellowship even before you're admitted, or that you can come into when you're admitted, it really makes your pathway so much easier in many ways, and we'll touch on that. We're going to highlight some resources that my colleague and I have identified that can also help you as you're preparing your grad school app. And then, like I mentioned before, we will leave plenty of time at the end for question and answer. So first, we're going to talk about why go to graduate school. So I want you all to think about a little bit beyond, that this is just what you've been told you should do. I think in chemistry, there's kind of this knowledge that to do the kind of jobs that are really research focused, so that are really meaningful, you do need a PhD for that. But there are also many jobs that may be a different type of degree or a different type of higher education or some work experience, and then a different type of higher education is more relevant. So, the main thing is that you really should have a passion for research. And hopefully as undergrads, you have already had the opportunity to be exposed to research, and you've really like being in the lab, running experiments, thinking through tough questions, getting stuck on things that aren't working is your happy place. You know, like for a lot of students, I went to graduate school with only a year of research experience and it was fine, but I didn't love it. And then when I got to the bench in grad school, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to spend the rest of my life at the bench, or this isn't necessarily my happy place. And there was many other places that were happy, quote, happy places for me. So that passion for research, because when you get to graduate school, you will be doing primarily, you will be doing research. I mean, at the end of the day, you'll be taking classes, but you'll be doing research, and that's where it's really going to get challenging. So you have to have that love of it, and also the desire to advance scientific knowledge. You really want to have like the desire to dive deep into a specific problem and to develop unique expertise that then you want to go back and either contribute, whether it be in academia or in industry. And you want to find unique ways to contribute to society, because as you think about it, you're gaining unique and kind of you're carving out a path of expertise as you advance in your scientific research. And so you want to go back and either, whether it be through industry or through academia, carve out a new niche, like in your field of research that you've created during during your graduate school experience. So you really want to have the passion to do that. You know, for some of you, if you have a desired career path, like you want to teach or you want certain leadership or management positions, it oftentimes may require a PhD. I know I absolutely love the position I have now and would not have it without a PhD. So even though when I got to graduate school, I was like, not sure if it's for me, I don't regret getting my PhD because I'm in the room making a lot of decisions and having a lot of influence because of that PhD today in academia, where a PhD is highly valued. But there are a lot of places where the PhD isn't as valued. I worked briefly at Facebook in tech, where I literally had a 25-year-old marketing manager tell me one time that I could remove the PhD from my signature in my email because nobody in tech cares if you have a PhD. I mean, if you think about it, tech was started by a bunch of college dropouts, you know? So it's not the only way to get to where you want to go. And it's important to think about where you want to go and whether the PhD is relevant and needed in that area. It also allows you to develop skills that transcend the lab, you know? So I'm sorry, Sarah, let me turn it over to you because I think we were supposed to tag team on this one.
That's fine. Yeah, I just want to note that it's like 100% fine if going into grad school you aren't quite sure what the next step is for you, but I think it's useful to reflect on what you're interested in pursuing before you commit to the 5 to 6 year journey that is a PhD. Someone asked in the chat if this workshop is relevant for applying to master's programs or just PhDs, and I'll note that in general, we're going to focus on PhD programs. And in STEM particularly, we don't necessarily recommend that you apply to a master's program without a really good reason to, because your PhD will be fully funded and you'll sort of get the master's on the way. Whereas master's programs are often very expensive and can result in a lot of loans. But it's pretty person dependent, and I think the application process is pretty similar between the two. And yeah, the last benefit of a PhD is that you really gain skills that you couldn't even imagine going in. And so you get really good at doing research. A PhD is really about teaching yourself things that you don't know, that your advisor doesn't know, that maybe no one really knows. And so you get good at breaking down complex problems, at critical thinking skills, at finding, reading, and synthesizing a lot of literature. And these skills can be applied whether or not you're at the bench after your PhD.
Okay, great. All right. So how do you set yourself for success as an undergrad? So I believe most of you are juniors or seniors. So hopefully you have already done this, especially for PhD programs. I will tell you the number one thing, at least at the top most competitive institutions, is how in-depth and how much undergraduate research experience you've had. So I was a transfer student, so I didn't get involved in research until my second year. I spent 3 years at Berkeley, and I didn't get involved because I didn't know that I wanted to go to grad school in my first year. But I did do research my last 2 years at Berkeley. Nowadays, they're looking at applications that if you started at a research institution as a freshman, they're almost wanting to see that you did research for 3.5 years before you're applying. You know, again, this is the most competitive research institutions, but there are ways to get involved in undergrad research, whether it's for credit or in another way, both at your home institution, so here at Berkeley, and then also participating in summer research programs. And then it's more than just being involved in research, but they also want to see that you have presented your research wherever you can, whether that's on campus symposiums, like some that we have, you know, here at UC Berkeley, or at conferences, and that you've presented a poster there, that you've either been a co-author on a paper or had a publication, if possible. I know that this is not always possible, so that's not, you know, for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to do that, don't worry about that. But for example, for me, when I was an undergrad, there was something called the Journal of Undergraduate Sciences run out of Harvard, and I published there, you know, because it just was another opportunity to get my work out there. I also competed in different conference competitions where I presented science papers, and I won some of those competitions. So every opportunity I saw, I submitted abstracts and then was accepted. And oftentimes you can apply for travel grants. And I went to both statewide and national conferences and presented my research, a little bit of research that I had. And I think that was a huge plus on my application, even though I had less years of research experience. Secondly, is it's really important to build relationships with faculty. And that goes beyond just attending office hours, but just actually having the faculty get to know you. So if you're in office hours and there's nobody there and you've run out of questions, like use that opportunity to ask the faculty about their journey, or tell them about you and what you're interested in. Because I'll tell you that it's not just about having those 3 or 4 letters of rec that they ask for, but it's about having those letters of rec be meaty. You know, so you want to have a genuine in-depth relationship with the faculty, and that takes time and that takes investment. So I think that it's important to build those relationships. And now is not too late to start. For those of you who are juniors, for those of you who are seniors, try to get a one-on-one with those faculty that you want to ask letters from, and really share more about who you are, what you've overcome as an undergrad. You know, what have your challenges been and have you overcome them? What are your strengths? So they can write these meaty letters for you. And then I think we're going to talk about a little bit later about how to inform those faculty when you ask for that letter of recommendation, because there's some tips there so that those letters even have more detailed information in it. But we can always tell the types of letters where people actually had a genuine relationship with the student that they're recommending, as opposed to just a run-of-the-mill letter that faculty write. So that's very important to build those relationships. It is also, especially for the top institutions, you know, the first thing they will look at often is the GPA, especially now at places like Berkeley, where the GRE is no longer part of the application process. That really is the only way that they can see, like, will the student keep up with our curriculum? Will they have the tools to go out and teach, you know, our classes if they have the GSI? So that's also really important. So if you want to go to graduate school, definitely prioritize your grades and your study habits first before extracurriculars and all the other things that you're involved in, because that is very important. That and the research experience are the top things. Then, you know, they do also want to see students that contribute to the broader community. So whatever your passion is, you know, lean into that passion and get involved in some kind of meaningful way. This is not like, you know, participating in 10 clubs and then just being able to write about that. They'd rather see that you have meaningful participation in one cause, but that you've actually leaned into it in some way. And then, you know, talking and building relationships also with graduate students, because it helps you gain a lot of insight also into what they did when they applied to grad school. And also, if you have good relationships with grad students, they will likely also help you with your application. You know, they will be happy to read it for you before you submit it. And any of that feedback that you can get from graduate students is really important. Also, it's important when you're applying and you're writing your statements to have a good understanding of where the field of research is right now and what are the hot areas in that field of research, where is it going? And the best way to understand that is to attend these seminars and other events that help you expand your knowledge on where the research is. So I know organic seminars happen, the inorganic seminars happen, chemical engineering has its own seminar series. I very rarely do I see undergrads in those seminars, and I believe you're all invited to them. I could be wrong, but I've been told that you're all invited to them. So, and I know that you're all incredibly busy, so it's not like you have to go every single week, but every now and then tap in and attend these different seminars. That helps expand your knowledge on research areas and also helps you identify what is it that you want to work on when you go into graduate school, and what is it that you want to write about in your graduate experience in your application, because you may have had experience in one area of research but also still have interest in 3 or 4 other areas, or in what 3 or 4 other professors are doing. And the only way that you can really understand when you're looking at different programs, and we're going to talk more about this in application, but they want to make sure that your research interests and your research expertise aligns with what their expertise is. So if you can't map that out because you haven't kind of expanded your knowledge and to what the different research areas are, then it's going to look more like a generic application, because these universities aren't necessarily looking for always the top students, but they're looking for the students that are the best fit. So it's very important that you're able to convey that. And then again, researching grad programs and reaching out to professors of interest. So Sarah and I vary a little bit on that. I know that it can be challenging to reach out to professors of interest at other programs, especially because come fall, they get lots of emails from students who are interested in working for them. And then at that point, they kind of ignore them. So if you can reach out to professors of interest in the summer, or for those of you who are juniors, the year prior, and talk to professors who might have a research interest that you're really interested in grad school. This isn't always successful, but every now and then it is. And especially if you're able to attend some of these conferences and you can meet professors who are of interest to you and develop relationships with them there, oftentimes that's where they meet you, and then they'll give you a meeting and they'll be like, yeah, talk to me about your research. And then oftentimes when they see applications, they will have already identified a student prior that they liked or that they met prior, because either they reached out in the year prior, they've met with them somehow, or they met them at a conference and they know who they are. So Sarah, do you want to give your insight on that?
Yeah, I think reaching out to faculty is great if you have the time and the bandwidth. And especially if you're, reaching out to faculty as a junior, or you find someone that you're really excited about as a junior, you might even try to find a summer research experience with them the next summer so that you can really sort of work with them and get to know them, and they could even become a letter writer for you. I think it depends on what area you're going into. But in some PhD programs, you apply to work with a faculty member, like directly, and they kind of, say that they will work with you and you get admitted, whatever. In other programs, you apply to like the chemistry PhD program at UC Berkeley, and then you do rotations if you're in chem bio, and then you choose a faculty member to work for. And so if you're applying to a program-based PhD program, then I think having individual faculty connections is useful, but not as critical as if you're applying to work directly with that faculty member, in which case the reaching out and the mutual discussions are completely normal.
Okay. Did you have anything else to add to this, Sarah?
I think some people who are undergrads now, maybe they're in their senior year, may not know if grad school is right for them. And I just want to point out that you don't have to know right now, and you don't have to apply to grad school this fall. And so there are these things called post-bac programs where maybe you got into research late and you haven't had a ton of research experience and you want to try it out a little bit more before you go to grad school. Those programs exist, and you can apply, or even just apply directly to a lab and spend some time sort of working before you decide to apply to grad school. Or you could go to industry for a little bit. I think it's totally okay not to be 100% sure, and there are sort of pathways to help you facilitate and figure out whether or not grad school is the next step you want to take.
Okay, I just scanned through the comments. There's a lot of great questions. We will address all of them at the end. Don't worry. I want to get through this presentation, and then we will make sure that all of your questions are answered. So don't worry, and go ahead and keep putting them in there. Or plus one it if you see a question that's already there that is also one that you have. But we will get to it, not to worry. Sarah, this is you.
Yeah, so I wanted to just go over an outline of the application process so that we're all on the same page, and sort of what is generally expected at each stage of the process. And so the summer before you're applying, your applications are usually due in the late fall. So in that summer or before, you should be researching schools and programs and sort of getting a sense of what's out there and starting to work on your application materials. I know it's hard to think about doing that during the summer. Maybe you're working, maybe you're relaxing, but you're unlikely to have more time once you get back to school. And so summer can be really a nice time to get a jump on a lot of these tasks. In the fall of your application cycle year, you'll be refining these materials. Hopefully, you'll be finalizing your list of programs. You'll be asking for your letters of recommendation, which you want to do as soon as possible. You all have been in these classes at UC Berkeley. You know how many of you there are. And if you can just imagine that like a large fraction of those people are asking each faculty member for a letter of rec, you want to make sure that you get in there early, that your faculty member knows what they need to write and where they need to send it, so that they're not scrambling at the last minute to get you letters. The fall also has a lot of these diversity-focused recruitment weekends. And so CGEM has a post-bac scholar right now who is at Harvard at the Harvard Life Sciences Preview Weekend, learning about their program, meeting faculty, and getting advice on grad school apps. And fall is also the time where you apply for this fellowship called the NSF GRFP. And so that's due in mid-October. Most of your grad school applications will be due in the November to December timeframe. And so you'll want to sort of spend a lot of fall getting ready with those. In the winter, you'll hear back from your schools. When I was applying, some of them even tried to get back to you before Christmas to sort of be at the top of your like family announcements or whatever. Others will get back to you in January. At a lot of programs, you'll then have an opportunity to visit the campus and meet with faculty. And these take kind of two flavors. And so in the biological sciences, the programs will often invite slightly more students than they may be able to accept for what's called an interview weekend. And so at that point, you do not yet have an acceptance from the school, but you have an invitation to come out, meet faculty, meet students, learn about the program. And you're sort of testing if the program is right for you. They're testing if you're right for the program. And then after the interview, you likely get an acceptance offer. In chemistry and some of the other physical sciences, you're accepted before you visit the campus. And so you visit campus, talk to faculty, and learn about the program, knowing that you already have a spot. You'll likely, hopefully, end up with many potential admission offers. And so in the spring, you'll choose where you want to pursue your PhD, generally with a deadline of about April 15th. And then if you want, a lot of programs have the ability for you to come early to campus. So you can come and do what's called like a summer rotation in a lot of the programs where you spend that summer working in a faculty lab before the school year even starts. And the program will give you sort of an early stipend and get you set up so that you can get a little bit of extra lab time in there and maybe get to work with an additional faculty member. You'll also be scrambling to find an apartment, to move, there'll be orientation events. And so that'll be sort of what summer looks like.
Okay, on this timeline, I wanted to add on here something important, which is this notion of interviews. I know that the chemical engineering department does interviews before they admit, and this is also common at many universities. And it is very important that you do prepare for those interviews. The important thing that you want to be able to do is communicate about your research, communicate in a very streamlined way, in a very confident way, demonstrate expertise, and be ready to talk about it. So if you can do practice interviews, or maybe Najat, we could almost even in December set up a session on interviewing, you know, when that time comes. But, you know, be able to give the high level, this is why my research is important. This is what I focused on. They want to see mastery of the research that you've done, or if you've worked in industry, you know, what did you do there and how did that advance science or advance, you know, whatever the mission of the company was. And so that is another part here that we haven't quite emphasized, but it is very important how you interview. And the most important thing there is your ability to communicate about your research. So that really takes practice. And I think that I want you to keep that in mind. And if you're doing practice interviews, practice talking about your research or have people ask you questions about your research. They really want to see people that have in-depth knowledge. And oftentimes people do have very in-depth knowledge, but they're not confident talking about it. And that can take practice, you know? So just and then that comes across and they just don't interview that well, even though they're brilliant. And there was a question in here, what do we mean at the bench? They're brilliant in the lab, at the scientific bench doing research, you know, or for some of you who aren't in STEM, whatever that research may look like. But if you're not comfortable talking about it for those programs where they are interviewing, it is going to show and your expertise won't come across as strongly. The other thing that I wanted to address, there was a question in here, the ones that are high level that apply probably for 95% of you, I do want to make sure we address in this recording. There was a question about can grad students write the letters? I work more closely with my grad students. So I'm glad that was asked. So it is actually, the letter will not be submitted on behalf of the grad student, but in all likelihood, the faculty is going to ask the grad student to draft a letter for them, because of course the faculty didn't get to know you as well, so but they are not submitted on behalf of grad students. I didn't see any applications where it was a grad student that submitted the letter. It was the faculty. So I think that those of you who are being mentored by your graduate student, talk to them about how is it going to happen when I end up needing a letter to the faculty, and also get a little bit of one-on-one time. If you've been working in one of your PI's labs, get some one-on-one time with them or with your grad mentor and your faculty, and do a small presentation to them about your research. Have the grad student really promote you to that faculty, and build your own relationship still with that faculty, because that letter ultimately, even if it's written by the grad student, is going to come from the faculty. So that was a great question, and I think that's something that applies probably to all of you. Okay.
Yeah, so your next step is probably to narrow down where you want to apply. And here I also want to emphasize that there's no one right answer to this, and the right school for you may not be the right school for your friend or your colleague, or someone in another major. But it depends a lot on the priorities that you have and the weight that you assign them. And so it's easy to come up with a really long list of places to apply. And for a lot of reasons, it might feel like you should just apply everywhere. But I suggest that you focus on schools where you would realistically attend if extended an offer. And so one of the first things people often think about, and one of the first things that I thought about, was geography. I knew I wanted to get out of the Midwest, and I only applied basically to schools on the coasts. And I think that that's great. I think that one piece of advice that I got that was really useful in the geography discussion is that you aren't choosing where to live for the rest of your life. You're just choosing sort of where you'll live for the next 5 to 6 years for a lot of you. Some of you might have partners who have location restrictions or family obligations, and those will also sort of help you figure out which schools you should be applying to based on geography. And then just as a former resident of the Midwest, I want to shout out some of the excellent programs at schools in the Midwest. Places like Illinois and Wisconsin have some fantastic chemistry programs. And so I would encourage people not to necessarily count them out at this stage, and remember that you will likely get to go on an interview there. And so if you're a little bit unsure about how you'll do in the winter time, like, you will get to visit in the winter and you will get to sort of see what that's like. And so, it's a bit of a balance, but if you're really excited about the faculty and you can handle the geography, I would put that on your list. The type of institution is something else to consider. And so in STEM, there are a lot of PhD programs that are held at big R1 universities like Berkeley, or, private institutions like Yale and UChicago, and those are great. There are also a lot of research institutes that do not have an undergraduate population, but do have a PhD program. And so those would be things like St. Jude or Scripps. Even UCSF doesn't really have an undergraduate population. And that may or may not be important to you, but if you think that you want to teach undergraduates at like a small liberal arts college, you may find that it's important in your PhD to get some experience teaching undergraduates. And so, looking into whether or not those institutions have partnerships, if there's some way for you to achieve that, would be something I'd suggest at this stage. The rank can be helpful in narrowing down your list, but I do want to urge folks not to take the program rankings too seriously. I think the top many programs are all very good, and you could succeed at any one of those. And so, that could be something that helps you out, but I wouldn't necessarily count a school out because of a rank if there are a lot of other benefits to that school.
Just to plus one that,
yeah.
When I applied to the University of Washington 20 years ago, it was #1 program in bioengineering, #1. Today, it's not even in the top 10. So that's not why I chose to go there. I chose to go there for other reasons, but that varies. Every year, those rankings vary. And, because it was #1, I mean, the network is still there, but again, it's so important not to make your choices based on that, because that changes, and for example, one of the schools I visited was Georgia Tech, and they were not even in the top 10 at that time, but I could see that they were going to be top 10 eventually, and they are actually either #1 or #2 now. So, and that's 20 years later. So again, those rankings, They're a guiding post, sure, because they have resources, they have faculty doing amazing research, but it changes. And by the time you get out in the world, it changes. So, yeah.
And a lot of the things that affect your day-to-day life as a grad student are not necessarily reflected in the number that US
Yeah.
News and World Report assigns. Another thing to look at are the program benefits. And so, what does the program that you'd be applying to provide for its grad students? Are there opportunities to TA if that's something you care about? Are you TAing as soon as you get onto campus, or do you get a year to kind of get adjusted? Do they have a rotation system? So in the more biological PhD programs, it's very common to do rotations in each lab. So you spend about 10 weeks in each lab that you might want to join. And then at the end, you pick where you want to do your PhD, and that gives you an opportunity to test out the science, to get a feel for the environment, and to get to know the PI and the students better than you would during just a short conversation. And I, if possible, really suggest that folks do rotation-based programs, because I think there are a lot of things that you don't really realize about a lab until you're in the lab doing the work. And so rotations can really help you make the best decision for the next 5 years of your life. And even in chemistry, a lot of the synthetic programs do like very short rotations right when you get there. So you still get that benefit of getting to sort of be in the environment and see like what the lab vibes are before you make your decision. Obviously, you want to look at faculty. And so I recommend that you apply to programs with multiple faculty that you'd want to work for. You never know if someone isn't take students that year, if they're on sabbatical, if there's going to be like 25 people who want to work for them and it might be hard to get a slot. So you want to give yourself many options where you could potentially be happy. And there's also like areas of focus to consider. And so certain schools are better known for certain things than other areas of science. And if you want to study RNA, like there were a ton of people at Yale doing RNA research. And so that was a really good place to go to do that. And, for example, I don't think Yale really has very many forensic chemists. And so if that's something you wanted to do, Yale would maybe not be the correct place for you. And so as you're perusing websites, I really recommend that you collect that information. So make a big spreadsheet that says the school, the programs, the faculty you'd want to work for, pros and cons, for and against, and the application due dates. And so you'll come back to this spreadsheet basically the entire year. During applications, it'll help you keep all of your information straight. And then if you get invited to campus for a visit weekend or an interview weekend, the first question the program will ask is, who do you want to talk to? And so it's useful to have already done that research and already be able to suggest faculty that are of interest to you instead of having to sort of go back and read through everything again. Just like you probably did when you applied to college, you'll want to strategize about where to apply. And so these applications are often not free, although you can request a fee waiver. But I think I spent about $1,000 applying to grad school, and that was not super fun. And so you want to maximize your chances of success while sort of minimizing your expenses to what is reasonable. And so you should think of it a lot like undergrad, where you're applying to safety schools where you feel confident that you would get in and that you could have a good time there. Target schools where you think you're a pretty good fit for the student body, and then also reach schools. And it can be hard to parse those as an undergrad. That might not be something that you're super comfortable like figuring out about each school, but that's where having these connections with graduate students and faculty and CDOs like Marissa talked about is really valuable. And so when I was making my grad school list, I had the grad students in my like summer research lab look at it. They told me schools that I was missing. They told me to take off a couple schools where realistically I was applying to that school to work with one person. And your grad students and faculty can kind of give you feedback in like, what is a reach school for you? What is the safety school? Are the schools you're applying to like well aligned with your interests and things like that? Marissa?
Yeah, two things. I would look also at the curriculum so say, AI now is really being talked about, machine learning, and there might be some programs that are like collaborating with their school of computer science or data science, and they have some machine learning course on their curriculum as a required class or something like that. But like, look at the classes that are offered to graduate students and the expertise they're hoping that you develop and see if that aligns with your interests. That's one thing. And also, asking your faculty mentors where they have colleagues that they personally, knowing you, think that you would be a great fit for you. And if they can make introductions to their colleagues, like my advisor, who was Kevin Healy here at UC Berkeley, he knew people at Penn, at Georgia Tech, at University of Washington, and introduced me. So when I got there, they knew me, and they were excited to talk to me because he had already talked to them beyond just the letter of rec. He had, basically advocated for me to them. And so that's also great and kind of gives you an in with who their colleagues are, at different institutions. There was two questions that came up that I also wanted to address that are on topics that we've already covered. One is industry versus research. So industry internships versus research opportunities. I will tell you here at Berkeley, the number one thing they value are letters of recommendation from research supervisors from undergraduate research. So an amazing letter from an industry internship is valued, but it doesn't hold the same weight. So if you think, oh, now there are exceptions. We did admit a student one year who had 5 industry internships, but no research experience. But guess what? They got here and decided they'd rather do a master's program that was more focused on business development because they wanted to get into industry sooner rather than later. So every now and then, and they were 5 exceptional industry internships, every now and then it does help. And you can't change what your background already is. But if you're looking at this summer coming up, and that you want to go to graduate school, and you have the choice between a top research position that probably pays half of what an industry internship pays, versus an industry internship, and you do know that you want to go to graduate school for a PhD, I highly recommend you do the research experience and optimize that. That's just here at Berkeley. It's a very research-centered university, and they really value research. Other places may be different. University of Washington also really valued industry experience, and most of their PhDs go on and become leaders in industry. And in fact, some of them are now CEOs of like CRISPR and some of the top biotech companies, because that's what they're more industry focused, So that's just here at Berkeley. It's research focused. So that was a question. Then there was also a question that I think is relevant probably to all of you, is if you've already graduated, what are other ways to acquire research? So I know that Sarah mentioned postbac programs. That is one brilliant way. And if you can get one, that's exceptional way, because then you just have the ability to focus just on research. Unfortunately, there are not enough postbac programs in the world or in the country for the demand. I have seen that there's a void in postbac programs. Even here at Berkeley, we have very, very few. So if you can build a relationship with a faculty who's willing to hire you as like a researcher, that's great. Or getting a job like at a place like one of the national labs, where it allows you to do some kind of research focused job where you can then do research that you can write about, or even do research as part of your role, I think is also very helpful. But it's a rough one. Sarah, do you have insight? Because that's a really rough one. Like if you graduate and you've decided that you have fallen in love with wanting to go to PhD and you have very little research experience, what do you do at that point?
Yeah, you can also just apply to work in labs. Like if you look on the Berkeley job site for like project specialist, I think is the term that we use. Like often labs at Berkeley are looking for someone to, maybe take care of the lab, but also do a little bit of research, and you can apply that way. And if you're data science focused, I think there's a little bit more acceptance for doing, what is it called? There are like big data competitions for science where you design like a program to predict the next, set of data based on some real data from a lab. And I think something like that could be sort of a way to show off your skills, lead to a real lab position, and then prep you for grad school.
Okay, great.
Oh, it's called Kaggle. Now I remember.
All right. One last question that I saw that was very relevant is, how does the value of a professor that you took a course from? That is very high, but it's very high if and when, one, you really excelled in that course. 2, if you went above and beyond, like say you became a tutor for that course, or you helped other students and that faculty knows that and can speak on that. And 3, how well the faculty knows you. So it's very important that they can talk beyond just the grade you got, but that you went to office hours, that you did this, that you did that, and then that they can also say, this student also participates in this, this, and this. So when you're asking for letters, and I'm about to get into that, you should really give them a comprehensive amount of information that empowers them with information to write in a comprehensive way about your letter. But yes, of course, because not everyone's doing research in 4 different labs. I think we require 3 letters. So not all students have had 3 different research advisors. So I do see a mix of research supervisors and faculty who they took a course from, but often the strongest ones are where they can say they got the top grade in my class, not always though, or where they can say they were among the exceptional students, they were consistently in office hours, they helped other students, they this, that, and then they can also talk about their contribution to the undergrad population because they know them well. So yes, that is part of what we see. All right, so you're applying to grad school. What does your application look like? It's so much work. So the first part is the research statement or the statement of purpose. That is the most important research statement. There's a research statement, and then here at Berkeley, we have also a personal statement. So I'm going to talk about the differences between the two. The research statement is really where you communicate professionally about the research that you've done, 1, and 2, the research that you're interested in doing. So 1 is, I often see in applications where students will say, I did 1 summer at Caltech as part of this program, and I did research on X, and that's it. And then they just move on to the next thing. And then I did research here, and I did research on X. And it's like, no. Tell a story. For each research experience that you've had, tell a story that communicates what was the overall impact of the research. Have a short paragraph that really describes the research that you did and why it matters, and also what specifically you did in that research experience. And 2, that communicates and shows that you are strong at communicating research. So this is also where they're looking at how, not just how much research has this person done, but how well is this person able to communicate research? And they're really looking at that. So describe each research experience as, this was the opportunity. This was the higher level motivation of the research. This was the specific project that I led. As part of this project, I used this skill, this characterization technique, this method of analysis. Be specific about the skills, this NMR, this data analysis, this programming language, to identify X, Y, and Z. Because then they say, oh, our lab could really use someone that has machine learning skills, or has programming skills, or has NMR characterization skills, or knows how to isolate or synthesize and run a bunch of columns, or whatever it is, So it's very important to put in the skills that you've gained in that. Then I was able to identify this particular finding, and this advanced the scientific research in this way. That's a complete story. So I often see students that just skip over that, and they think, oh, this was a really hot 10 weeks that I spent at Caltech doing a really hot topic, but you don't say anything about what you did in that topic. Did you look over your grad student mentor's shoulder for 10 weeks and just kind of observe what they did? Or did you actually lead a project and understand? And even if you looked over the grad student mentor's shoulder, be able to explain what the research project was, and what skills you gained. And it's very important that you communicate both your contributions in the research and what the research is and why it matters in this section. So that's the first thing, okay? The second thing, then if you presented that research at a specific conference, I presented this, I was a co-author on this paper. I can't tell you how often I'll look at people's statements, and then I see on their resume that they presented it somewhere, or that they were co-author, but they don't actually highlight that in the statement. Highlight that in the statement. It's very important because they're looking for those things. And oftentimes, even though you submit a resume, they're not looking at every single page of your 100-page essay. And if it's not highlighted in the one thing that they're probably spending the most amount of time on, which is your research statement, then you're losing an opportunity to emphasize those pluses that you did. So first is communicating the research that you've done. If you have references, if you say this research was published here or there, include the reference. If you, Sarah, this part here about, are you suggesting that also when they say the background that they should include a reference? Because I don't see that all that often when I read research statements.
You should put, when you like cite a fact that someone else discovered, you should try to use a reference for that. I think.
Okay.
Is that what you're like? I don't think it needs to be super, super, super thorough. But I think it can show that you have some like understanding of the field and some level of scholarship to be citing like major papers in, the introduction to your research.
Okay. I don't often see scientific references in the research statement, but there are two things, and I'm actually going to get to that. So the second part of the research statement then is very important, which is you want to identify research that you're interested in doing moving forward and how that aligns with the university that you're applying to. So if you're applying to Berkeley here at chemistry, it's very important in the College of Chemistry that you specifically say, my overall goal is to advance research related to sustainability, specifically new materials that have less impact on the environment, whatever, some big picture. Then beyond that, you say, I am interested, identify at least 3 faculty. I am interested in the research of Brooks Able Lab, specifically because of the work they are doing on X, Y, and Z, which then aligns to your overall goal. Second, I am interested in the research of, and this takes work. I see people who do a statement and they just submit the same statement to 6 different universities. And these universities these days, they are looking for a student who's a fit for them. They want to make sure their research interests align with the research interests of the faculty, And so you identifying which faculty you're specifically interested in working for, and there could be more, but the rule of thumb is kind of like identify at least 3 faculty and say specifically why you're interested in their research and how that aligns with what your research interest is. That is what they mean by statement of purpose, So do your research on what these faculty are doing and what they're focusing on, and how is it that it aligns not just with what you're doing, but also with the background that you come in with. I could bring this background to advancing the research in this person's lab because of X, Y, and Z, and make sure that it aligns with what that lab is actually doing. That really, then the faculty go, oh, we really could use that expertise like that. And that is exactly what we need. And it is a good match for what we're already doing, And then the third part is asking for feedback from peers and mentors, because it's very important that you get second and third reads on that. Okay. So then the second part is the personal statement. So the personal statement is a statement that then asks something along the lines of, tell us a little bit more about your personal story. And more so, I think something here at College of Chemistry, it's something along the lines of, how have you contributed to the diversity of your campus? Or how have you advanced the field? It's kind of like, tell us something beyond that, basically, either obstacles you've overcome, you were a leader in a chemistry club, you participated in ChemiCar and went to a competition, you did outreach in the local community to teach science in underserved schools, anything like that is really important. And again, this is another place where, I remember looking at people's personal statements, and I have to read the whole thing, and written in the back is like, I'm first gen, like at the one of the very last things is like, I'm first gen as a first gen student, but it's like in paragraph 5. And oh yeah, I was also president of SACNAS. SACNAS is the Society for Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. Most people know SACNAS is an organization. And they're president of SACNAS, and they started a whole new club focused on chemistry at their university. But it's like hidden in the back. They're like talking about all this other stuff. And then at the very end is all of these highlights. And I'm like, wait. You're first gen who then overcame all these obstacles and was a president and a leader. Like that stuff should shine at the beginning of your personal statement, because it's very unlikely, like this is a second priority and they are scanning this for additional pluses that make you stand out, but they're not reading this as in-depth as the research statement. So the stuff that really is the highlight of who you are, put it up front, and also anything that makes you unique, put it up front. And it can be, anything that makes you unique next to your peers, people really are looking for that. They're looking to bring unique individuals that are going to make an impact and stand out, not just the same cookie cutter from everyone. So think about what makes you unique, reflect on that, and then use that to write your personal statement. There's a third aspect on here, actually, that Berkeley, for chemistry, they also ask you, it's optional if you want to provide a writing sample. So I want to give a hint. If you're going to provide a writing sample, what the faculty like to see is actually a formatted, like JAX style paper that talks about your research, with references. That's where you do use the references. You do use the figures. And JAX is the Journal of American Chemistry Society or something like that, right, Sarah? And there's a certain format to it, the 2 columns with the abstract. If you have an opportunity, or if you've written up your research somewhere and can actually include that, where you submit like a formal scientific paper, kind of, even if it hasn't been published. In fact, most of the time it hasn't been published. But if you've already done that, or that's an exercise, again, this is a third thing, but it's another way to demonstrate that you know how to write a scientific paper. That's only if they ask you for a written statement, and it is an optional part of most applications. But if you're going to include a writing sample, that's the kind of writing sample, at least here at chemistry, that they're looking for. It's not like an op-ed or a paper from your English class or whatever. Like that's not going to help you. Okay. Second, also in the personal statement, if you have certain areas, like say one semester your father died, you had to go home, take care of a loved one, and you had a weaker GPA that semester, you can describe that in your personal statement. Like that's a place where you can say, this particular semester was very impactful, was my most challenging, because I think there's a question in there, like, what obstacles have you overcome? If there is a dip in your transcript somewhere and there's a reason for it, or if you started, what they like to see too is maybe if your GPA is a little bit lower, but you started low and then got stronger as the years went on, also say that. We have students that come into Berkeley from underprepared schools. They didn't get AP chemistry before. So their first year, they're catching up to their peers in terms of the preparation they've had before they come here, And so I'm at underserved schools. So we call them underprepared. So they don't have the same level of preparation. So their first year GPA is going to be lower, but then they really, really bring it up. And at the end, it's quite high. But maybe the junior semester is almost a 4.0, but the first semester was like a 2.6, but overall, all they're seeing is the 3.6. But if you can describe that in your personal statement, then they do look at that and they do consider that, so those things are the personal statement is also an area to explain any anomalies in your transcript or GPA that would help people understand where they came from. Okay, I think we talked quite a bit about letters of recommendation. So, the important thing is to think strategically, to ask early. And when you're asking for your letter of recommendation, what I do is I actually have students write me a sample letter of recommendation, like write me your letter of recommendation and then send me your CV and then send me some bullet points on what you want me to emphasize. Like what have you personally overcome? What do you think stands out about you? I ask for that full package. And then when I open, I have lots of material. And oftentimes I learn so much more by asking for that material. But students, oftentimes when they don't send me much, there's not much I can write about because yes, I've supervised them here or there, or I taught them or whatever it is, but I don't know them all that depth in all that depth. And if they don't provide me meaty materials that really help me understand their story, then there's not that much I can say about them. So when you're asking for your letters, like say, is it okay if I provide you some bullet points that I want you to emphasize? Can I also share my CV? Can we have a meeting prior to discuss what I'd love for you to emphasize in my letter of recommendation? Those things really help those letters stand out. Especially, for some of you who have really overcome a lot, often your professors don't know about that. So share that with them. And that requires a level of vulnerability, like share with them your story, You know, what did you come from? What did you overcome? What are the obstacles you faced? You had to also work 40 hours a week while you were at school. You also had to send money back home to your family. They don't know those things, and it really changes their perspective of how they know you. They're like, wow, and this student did all this and still got an A in a class. Or even if they got a B plus, that all of a sudden changes that B plus. You know, they're like, wow, this student was doing all of that. And so really make sure that your student, that your professors that you're asking for these letters know the good and the bad that you've overcome, because that really shows them so much. And these professors, for the most part, they really do care about that kind of stuff, you know, and students often, like, we live in this culture where students are trying to hide that kind of stuff. And it doesn't help, you know, in terms of like, that's where you should share it in your personal statement. And also your faculty should, when they write like the student has resilience and they've overcome this and they still excelled and they were this and that really means a lot. So I highly recommend that. So application, Sarah did mention asking for a fee waiver, and then can reach out. Yes, you should reach out to professors of interest. Oh, we talked about that. CDO, so we talked about that. Okay, so I will stop. Sarah, what else? Do you have anything else to add to this? This was pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I think so. If people aren't comfortable disclosing something about themselves in the personal statement, having your letter writer make that disclosure for you can also be like a helpful way to get it in the application package without, making yourself feel uncomfortable.
Okay. So there was a question in the chat. Is it weird to say, here's my list of mental illnesses? I wouldn't put it that way. I wouldn't say, here's my list of mental illnesses. But I personally have admitted people into a program to do research at Stanford because they were very transparent about when they were in high school, they overcame a bipolar diagnosis. They had to receive a lot of treatment. And despite all of that, they programmed, they developed a new code to do X, Y, and Z. They did all of that. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. You know, we also recently have made an exception for a student that has autism, and we recognize that, and that did actually explain a lower GPA, and they did exceptional research. So at the end of the day, they were like, wow, if they can do that, and the professor says, this is the best student I've had, and this is the student I want, then, and they could, and the autism explains the lower GPA, that really stands out. So I would not put it as, and this is again, what you're comfortable with. But if that was a big battle, I personally was diagnosed when I was in community college with ADHD, and that getting diagnosed and getting treated for that was a huge part of my journey. And when I came to Berkeley, I was finally treated, but I also still to this day struggle with ADHD. And that was a big part of my journey, you know, like learning to manage all of the different things with that. Now, I didn't talk about it because 20 years ago, nobody was talking about that, you know, and I didn't even, when I got to the NIH, I didn't even disclose it to my workplace because I was afraid of the stigma. But things have changed. And so if overcoming mental health issues has been a part of your journey, it just depends on how comfortable you are. But if you can put a spin like, I faced this, I overcame it. You don't want it to be like this sob story, so to say, but those things are moving. And also, you know, it depends. Like some faculty are like, wow, that's incredible. And others might be, I mean, I can't speak for everyone. There might be a stigma, but I think it's all like, for me, for example, I would have never, that student wouldn't have been admitted because in many ways they didn't fit the demographics of who we were looking for. But because of the way they told their story about overcoming a bipolar diagnosis and learning to live with that, and still is exceptional, she was admitted because she told her story. So it is like this strange thing about, you kind of have to decide like, how open do I want to be about those kinds of things? And then at the end of the day, have faith that the institutions that value who you are as a whole and what you bring to the table and what you've overcome will actually notice that and value it. But it is very, and it's something that's changing more and more. Like, for example, if COVID really impacted you, you know, and you lost a lot of learning during COVID, we have students from all backgrounds, but especially from lower income backgrounds, that didn't get specific math skills during COVID, and then it affected them when they came to Berkeley. And they talk about that, you know, and we get it. You know, we had students who applied from Puerto Rico who had their entire home destroyed in a hurricane and then didn't even have access to the internet while they were going to school during COVID, and that's taken into account, like, and so, you know, it just, but it's all on your comfort level. But I do say, like, if that does explain some of the challenges that you've had, and with having the 3.9 GPA or whatever it is, and it's part of your story, I think that's part of what makes you stand out. As long as it's that's not the only thing you're focusing on. And again, I can't emphasize enough, the personal statement is secondary to the research statement. And the research statement should really be focused on the research, both what you've done and what you want to do moving forward. So make sure that you separate those two things. And I think the personal statement is really where you can go deeper and get more vulnerable if that applies to you, and in an authentic way. And that authenticity comes across. I think that's the best advice I can give. I don't know, Najat or Sarah, if you want to plug in on that particular comment. Okay. All right.
All
Sarah.
right, this is me. So we mentioned earlier in passing, but I think it might be a surprise to a lot of folks that PhD programs are in general fully funded, especially in STEM. And so what this means is that federal grants from usually like the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Energy or the National Science Foundation end up paying for your tuition. They pay for your like sort of fees and health insurance, and then you get a modest living stipend from the university. And so when I started grad school, like a high stipend was somewhere in the low 30,000s. That was in 2013. And now I think the Yale stipend is like 49,000 a year. And the vary a lot among institutions, and depending on sort of how that institution is organized, the stipend could change a lot department to department. And so people who came in as chemistry PhDs at Yale made like $2,000 or $3,000 less than those of us that came in as biology PhDs. And so that is something to consider and compare as you're looking at schools. Although I think that the gaps are shrinking a lot now between the different departments. And of course, that living stipend doesn't go as far in New York City, for example, as it does in New Haven. And so as you think about geographically where you want to be, keeping an eye on the cost of living is something to consider. And these are also things to talk to current students about when you interview. And even though your grad school is, getting paid for and you're getting paid to go to grad school, it's still a good idea to compete for fellowships and get your own funding. This looks good on your resume. It, in some cases, actually gives you a higher stipend. And so some schools will pay you to bring in outside money because it saves them, or they can reallocate that grant money elsewhere in the long term. And it gives you a lot more freedom when you choose an advisor. And so if an advisor knows that they have a grant that is X size and it can only fund 2 students, then they're only going to be able to take 2 of you that year. But if you come in with your own money and you say, hey, I'm free for 3 years, then you might be able to get into a lab that otherwise couldn't afford you. And similarly, a lot of these fellowships are actually portable. And so if you, for whatever reason, realize that that was the wrong lab environment for you, you can move your funding to another lab, and it can make it a lot easier to make that switch. And so there's a handful of common fellowships that most STEM folks are looking at. That's the NSF GRFP, which we've mentioned a couple of times. That's the Graduate Research Fellowship Program from the National Science Foundation. And you can apply both as an undergraduate or post-bac, and then you get a second chance at applying once you get to grad school. They give out about 2,000 of those a year, and it pays for your stipend, and it pays the school for your tuition. NSDEG is run out of the Department of Defense. That's another one. There are also a bunch of private foundation-funded fellowships, and so those come from places like the GEM Consortium, the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship, which is specifically for new Americans, folks who've recently immigrated or are children of immigrants. And there's also things like the Hertz Foundation. And these look great on your CV if you get them. A lot of the applications for the fellowships look really similar to applications for grad school. So for NSF, you're writing a research statement and a personal statement, and you're getting letters of recommendation. And so if you're able to bandwidth-wise, it can be easy to sort of do all of these things at the same time. And then finally, I want to make a note that as you're choosing which school to go to remember that stipends are somewhat negotiable and that you should not be afraid to ask for what you need. And so if you need to move across the country in order to go to school at this place and they aren't able to help you or they don't offer a moving stipend, you should ask. The department may have some funds that they're able to move around to help reimburse you a little bit for those big out-of-pocket costs. Some schools will have sort of computer allowance awards, things like that. if one school offers you maybe a $5,000 special award, they really want you to go there, but that's not your top pick, like tell your top pick and see if they'll match it. Just don't be afraid sort of to negotiate on that a little bit. And I think if we do an interviews workshop later this year, we can talk more about that process.
Here at Berkeley, they are not negotiable. So, but we have students who will send to us, this is what Caltech offered me, this is what Stanford offered me. And, you know, we give them an answer like, we are not able to increase the stipend, but sometimes if we're able to identify an internal fellowship that they qualify for, we could let them know that. I don't know that it changes the stipend. Maybe in CVE, it might change it a little bit. I'm not sure that it does in chemistry, but that is also just here at UC Berkeley. That doesn't mean don't ask, because you should ask. And for some students, they said that. And when I said, you know, when we had to come back with like, we can't match that, they still chose us. So, but we came back with like, we can't match that, but here are all the benefits of being at Berkeley. And this is what you should also consider, like the network you have and all that. And they chose to come here, you know? So, but yes, but it really is very impressive when you ask. So, and different institutions are different. I think some of the private schools there is room, you know, to for sure. So always ask, especially if yeah, always ask. Okay, of course, once you've been admitted. Okay. All right, Sarah, I think you're kicking us off on this one.
Yeah. So there are a lot of resources out there to help you apply to grad school. I just wanted to highlight a couple that I know are particularly useful from folks who've used them in the past. And so Scientifico Latino is an organization that supports folks from historically underrepresented groups going to grad school. And they have been running for years a graduate student mentorship initiative. It was actually founded by one of my classmates at Yale. And they pair current and former graduate students with folks who are applying so that you can get feedback on your personal statements, you can get interview practice, all of that stuff in a really one-on-one format. They also run a ton of webinars on a lot of different topics, and I believe the recordings are posted on their website. And then actually here at Berkeley, there's a similar mentorship program called Getting into Grad School that's run through the grad division, where you can get access to a lot of workshops and mentorship to really get those research statements and personal statements into great shape and give you the greatest chance of success getting into grad school.
All right. I already mentioned, we mentioned this prior, but to the extent that you can, do apply to conferences to present your research. So that is a big plus. This is a number of conferences. So a lot of these are diversity conferences. ABRCAMS is the annual biomedical research conference for minority scientists. Even if it's presenting a poster at these conferences, number one, it looks amazing and you can also talk about it. But two, when you are presenting a poster at these conferences, faculty and people like me are out there watching and scoping and recruiting future grad students. And students I went to SACNAS, Novachet, ABRCAMS, and SHIP last year. And then I also went to a regional NSBE conference and I visited those posters. And the students that blew me out of the water, I gave them my card. I said, contact me. I want to help you with your application. I flagged their application when they applied. We were there recruiting, so it's both. It looks great. It also is exposure to faculty who are out there scoping it for talent that they're looking for, so there are many conferences, and oftentimes if you apply, you can also apply for a travel award to go to that conference. And that is a big plus. And yeah, and then I think, Sarah, you want to mention this?
Yeah, and I'll also just note that the conferences have these big exposition halls a lot of times that are full of booths from different graduate programs. And so you can literally just like go shopping for a grad school. You can get fee waivers, you can get on the application list, you can talk to faculty. Like it's a real one-stop shop situation. There's also these diversity-focused recruitment events at individual schools or programs. And so someone in the chat asked for a list of these, and I really wish that a complete list existed, but it's a little bit choose your own adventure here. And so I've chosen some that I know about, and Scientifico Latino has a list that they know about. And as you're researching programs, I suggest that that's something that you also look at if a diversity-focused preview weekend is something you'd want to do. But here's a couple. I'll note that the applications are still open for Michigan MCore, which is run by the chemistry department, but they're due September 30th and you need letters of rec. So if you're interested in that one, ask people really soon. You don't necessarily have to do these events at the same time that you're applying, a lot of them are open if you're planning to apply in the next like 2 years to that grad program. So this is something that juniors could be doing now in preparation to apply their senior year.
Okay. So I have been, by the way, responding to questions. And before we stop the recording, I just want to scan through and make sure, Sarah, maybe you can do the same,
Mhm.
that there aren't any questions that really would apply to the broader population. I do want to mention that Sarah and I are STEM background with PhDs. So this presentation was largely focused at PhD programs and particularly STEM focused PhD programs, because STEM focused PhD programs will fund you to do research in the lab to go to grad school. I'm not sure about humanities and social sciences. So I think I'm not sure that it's the same there. So, and I just don't have the expertise to answer that. So that was the goal of this focus. I think I'm seeing where can we search for conferences? So for example, if you're a chemistry major, all of these conferences that are listed here are all science and engineering conferences. And then if you're a chemistry major, like ACS, the American Chemistry Society, ICE is American something for chemical engineers, American Institute for Chemical Engineers, something like that. Society of Women Engineers. Also the student groups, they often go to conferences together as groups. So maybe checking in to see what conferences they're looking at. There are also a number of statewide symposiums and UC focused conferences as well. And maybe Najette, if you could send out some information on like, because I know UC does one, like a UC focused research conference for undergraduate research. And so that is one that all of you could and should be doing. And then it's here in California, so a lot of students will drive to either UC Davis or wherever it is that year. And those also count, so and also I would ask around about which ones are the ones. I know Abercams is very focused on students presenting posters. There's about 150 students in each discipline every hour, and there are 6 sessions of those. There are thousands of students who present posters there, whereas SACNAS, much, much, much less poster presentations. So much harder there, but it is another place where students present. But Abercams was like a machine of students presenting posters. And so also just ask around. You can even ask us. Okay, so the rest I am seeing are specific questions. So I think at this point, we thank you and we will stick around for questions and especially if they're a little bit more specific. And also just, this may be an overwhelming amount of information Sarah and I were very well versed in this topic, and we care passionately about empowering you with all of the little hidden secrets and tools and things that we've learned just being on our side of things. And so we're giving you a lot of information with a lot of passion. If you haven't done all of these things in the last 4 years, it's okay. Take this, rewatch it, make notes, and then do the best you can, get feedback, reach out to your program directors, reach out to Najette, use resources. If we do another workshop in December around interviewing, we could do that. Like reach out to your professors, your mentors. If you're part of a program, if you're part of EOP, have that staff look at your application, get help. There are lots of resources across campus to get help. So just, and then you just, at the end of the day, you just do the best you can, so don't get overwhelmed if you don't nail all of these things. I think particularly for those of you who are applying to STEM programs, our feedback on the research statement and the personal statement and how to get the letters of rec is probably, if you're going to take away any major takeaways, those are I think probably the biggest takeaways. But also you're all Berkeley students, I think. So you are already going in to this process, having come from one of the best institutions, and the faculty who are reading your application know that. So just don't stress. Also, just like FYI, across the land of academia, they know that Berkeley GPAs are typically lower because we don't have these inflated grades. Literally, the average GPA of a student at Berkeley is something just above a 3, whereas at places like Stanford and MIT, it can be a 3.5, a 3.6, So I had faculty, literally in my day, I had faculty tell me, we take a Berkeley GPA and add 0.5. and then we hold it equivalent to everyone else's, you know? So if your GPA is not that 3.9, don't worry, you know, because you're also Berkeley students where the mean is lower, and academia knows that. So don't worry, you know, and you guys, you know, take all of this and use your resources, and also just, we wish you the best, and be confident and don't be overwhelmed. And we hope this was helpful. Sarah, do you have any closing words?
No, just that, we're around. I think there's still some questions we can answer off the recording.